My daughter-in-law and her rich family looked down on me for being humble. On the way to their Christmas party, I helped a woman with her broken car. When I arrived late and dirty, they said, "We'd prefer if you left." Then that same woman walked in. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The invitation arrived not as a warm personal note, but as a formal declaration of status. It was a thick, cream-colored card, heavy with the self-importance of its sender. The kind of paper that feels like money to the touch. The lettering was an ornate, swirling gold script, and it announced with a distinct lack of holiday cheer the annual Harrington Christmas Gala. For the past 5 years, since my son Michael had married into their world of glittering hollow ambitions, this invitation had become a source of quiet annual dread in my small peaceful home. My name is Esther Mae Washington, and my life is a quiet testament to the value of things that cannot be bought: faith, compassion, and the deep, abiding joy of a life spent in service to others. I am a retired nurse, a widow, and a woman who finds her deepest purpose in the simple, humble work of her church's charity outreach program. My world is one of worn hymn books, the scent of antiseptic from my old hospital days, and the warm, grateful smiles of the people I am able to help. It is a good life, a life rich in the only currency that has ever mattered to me. My son's in-laws, the Harringtons, operated on a different currency entirely. They were new money, a family that had clawed its way to a precarious perch in the city's social hierarchy, and now clung to it with a desperate, white-knuckled ferocity. Their lives were a performance, a constant, exhausting broadcast of their own wealth and importance. Their home was a mansion, their cars were foreign, and their smiles were as polished and insincere as the marble floors in their grand, echoing foyer. My son Michael, a good, kind man who had been raised on the values of humility and hard work, had been completely and utterly captured by their world. He was in love with his wife, Brittany, a woman who was the beautiful, perfect, and deeply insecure product of her parents' social climbing ambitions. And in his desperation to prove himself worthy of her, to prove that he belonged in their world of country clubs and European vacations, he had begun to look at his own humble origins, and at me, with a kind of gentle, pitying embarrassment. The phone call came a few days after the invitation. It was Michael, his voice a mixture of forced cheerfulness and a familiar underlying anxiety. "Mom," he said, his voice a little too loud. "You got the invitation, right? To the Harringtons' party." "I did, sweetheart," I said. "It looks very grand." "Yeah, it's a big deal," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "Brittany's father is trying to close a big deal with some investors who will be there. So it's really important that we all, make a good impression." I knew what he meant. He was not asking me to be myself. He was asking me to be someone else, someone who would not be an embarrassment to his new, powerful family. "Please, Mom," he said, his voice now a low, pleading whisper. "Just for one night. Can you just try to fit in?" The plea was a small, sharp knife in my heart. To fit into their world would be to betray everything I was. It would be to value the label on my dress over the love in my heart, the size of my bank account over the depth of my soul. But for my son, for the deep, aching love I still held for the boy I had raised, I would once again step into their world of cold, glittering surfaces, and I would pray that my own quiet light would not be completely extinguished. My relationship with my son's new family had been a long, cold war of 1,000 tiny cuts. From the moment Michael had introduced me to Brittany and her parents, I had been weighed, I had been measured, and I had been found wanting. Their judgment was never overt, never spoken aloud in a way that I could directly challenge. It was a campaign of subtle, condescending slights, of casual cruelties disguised as well-meaning advice. It was in the way Brittany's mother, a woman named Carol who was draped in diamonds and disappointment, had looked around my small, immaculate home during her one and only visit. "Oh, how cozy," she had said, her eyes sweeping over my well-loved, slightly threadbare furniture, the word cozy a clear and obvious euphemism for small and poor. It was in the way Brittany would talk to me, her voice a slow, patronizing drawl, as if she were speaking to a small child or a person of diminished mental capacity. She would explain the plot of a popular movie to me, or the function of a new smartphone, with a painstaking and deeply insulting simplicity. She saw my lack of interest in the shallow, fleeting trends of the modern world, not as a choice but as a sign of my own intellectual deficiency. My son Michael was a silent, pained observer of this quiet, ongoing humiliation. I would see the flicker of shame in his eyes when his wife would make a particularly cutting remark. the way his jaw would tighten when his father-in-law would make a condescending joke about my little church charities. But he never spoke up. He never defended me. His fear of displeasing his new family, his desperate need for their approval, was a force far more powerful than his loyalty to his own mother. He had made his choice, and I was the price of his admission into their exclusive, glittering world. The most painful incident had happened at my own birthday dinner a few months prior. Michael and Brittany had taken me to a new, impossibly expensive restaurant downtown, a place of hushed tones and intimidatingly small portions. I had been excited, not for the food, but for the chance to spend a rare evening with my son. But the Harrington parents had coincidentally been dining at the same restaurant, and had insisted on joining our table. The evening had quickly devolved into a performance of their own wealth. They had ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. They had summoned the chef to their table to complain about the seasoning of the fish, and they had talked in loud, booming voices about their recent trip to Paris and the renovations they were planning for their summer home in the Hamptons. I had sat there in my simple department store dress, feeling like an intruder at my own celebration. The final devastating blow had come with the bill. As the waiter placed the leather-bound folder on the table, Brittany's father had snatched it with a theatrical flourish. "I'll take care of this," he had announced loudly, making sure the entire restaurant could hear. He had then looked at me, a smug, pitying smile on his face. "Happy birthday, Esther," he had said. "Consider this our little gift to you. I'm sure a meal like this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for someone on a fixed income." In that moment, he had not just paid for my dinner, he had bought it. He had turned a family celebration into a public act of charity, a way to display his own wealth by highlighting my lack of it. And my own son, had said nothing. He had simply stared at his plate, his face a mask of silent, impotent shame. I had gone home that night, the taste of the expensive food like ash in my mouth, and I had wept. I was not just losing my son to another family, I was losing him to a sickness of the soul that valued money over love and status over kindness. In the face of their constant casual cruelty, my only defense was to retreat deeper into the quiet, meaningful world of my own life. I could not compete with their wealth, so I would not try. Instead, I would offer them a gift that came from a currency they did not understand. A currency of time, of patience, of love. In the weeks leading up to the Harringtons' Christmas gala, I dedicated every spare moment to my gift for Brittany's mother, Carol. I had decided to make her a prayer shawl, a garment of comfort and of grace, a thing of quiet handmade beauty in a world of loud, mass-produced luxury. I chose the yarn with care, a soft, luxurious blend of merino wool and silk, in a deep, elegant shade of sapphire blue that I knew would complement her eyes. The work was slow and methodical, a form of meditation. Each stitch was a tiny, silent prayer. A prayer for my son, that he might find his way back to the good, kind man I had raised. A prayer for his wife, that she might one day find a source of value in the world that was not reflected in a price tag. And a quiet, selfish prayer for myself. A prayer for the strength to endure their world with my own grace and dignity intact. The shawl grew under my practiced, nimble fingers, the intricate lace-like pattern a testament to a skill that had been passed down through generations of women in my family. It was a skill that required patience, focus, and a deep intuitive understanding of the relationship between tension and form. It was a skill that could not be bought, that could not be rushed, that could not be faked. As I worked, I thought of the other, more important work that filled my days. My work with the church's outreach program was the true center of my life. I spent my days in the humble, often chaotic world of the city's homeless shelters, its soup kitchens, its free clinics. I was not a wealthy benefactor, writing checks from a distance. I was on the front lines, a quiet, steady presence in the lives of people who had been forgotten by the world. I held the hands of the sick. I listened to the stories of the broken. I served hot meals to the hungry. It was a life of profound, and often heartbreaking, meaning. It was a life that kept my own small sorrows in perspective. It was a life that the Harringtons, in their gilded cage of wealth and status, could not even begin to comprehend. On the day before the party, I finished the shawl. It was, even to my own critical eye, a masterpiece. It was light as a cloud, yet warm and substantial, the deep sapphire blue shimmering with an almost luminous depth. I wrapped it carefully in layers of soft white tissue paper, and placed it in a simple, elegant gift box. It was a gift from my world, a quiet, humble offering of time, and of love. I knew that it would likely be met with a polite and dismissive smile from Carol Harrington. I knew that it would be a pathetic, insignificant thing next to the expensive, designer gifts that would be exchanged at their party. But it was an honest gift. It was a true gift, and it was the only kind of gift I was capable of giving. The day of the party arrived with a cold, sleeting, and utterly miserable rain. The sky was a uniform, depressing shade of gray, and the wind howled with a mournful, wintry fury. It was a day for staying inside, for a warm fire and a good book, but I had a party to attend. I had known with a kind of weary certainty that Michael and Brittany would not offer me a ride. To have their mother arrive at the Grand Harrington mansion in their own luxury car was a social risk they were not willing to take. Their forgetfulness was a deliberate and not particularly subtle act of social distancing. So I began my long, complicated journey on my own. My journey to their world was a slow, multi-stage pilgrimage across the city, a series of public buses that connected my humble working-class neighborhood to their exclusive gated enclave. I sat on the damp plastic seats, my simple gift box clutched in my lap, and I watched as the landscape outside the rain-streaked windows transformed. I watched as the familiar, friendly storefronts of my own neighborhood gave way to the anonymous, sterile glass towers of the downtown business district, and then finally to the sprawling manicured lawns and towering mock Tudor mansions of the city's wealthiest suburbs. It was a journey across the city's class divide, a journey that felt like a passage to a different and alien country. The final bus stop was, as I had known it would be, a long, cold and wet half-mile from the gates of their community. I stepped off the bus into the biting, sleet-filled wind, my thin cloth coat an inadequate shield against the weather. I began the final leg of my journey on foot, my sensible low-heeled shoes splashing through the icy puddles that had formed on the sidewalk. The rain was coming down harder now, a cold, stinging assault that soaked the shoulders of my coat and plastered my hair to my face. I clutched the gift box to my chest, trying to protect it from the rain, my beautiful handmade offering now in danger of being ruined before it was even received. It was on a particularly dark and deserted stretch of the road, a place where the towering hedges of the surrounding mansions blocked out the weak gray light of the afternoon, that I saw them, the flashing four-way hazard lights of a stranded car, a faint, rhythmic beacon in the gloomy, rain-swept twilight. The car was a sleek, impossibly expensive-looking luxury sedan, the kind of car that seemed almost offended to find itself in such a common, undignified predicament. It was pulled over onto the narrow, muddy shoulder of the road, one of its rear tires completely and spectacularly flat. Standing beside the car, looking small and helpless in the vast empty landscape, was an old woman. She was holding a small, useless-looking umbrella that was doing little to protect her from the driving, sleeting rain. She was dressed in an elegant dark wool coat and a string of pearls, a woman who was clearly and profoundly out of her element. She looked distressed and cold and utterly completely alone. My first instinct, the instinct of a city dweller who has been taught to mind her own business, was to keep walking, but my second, and much deeper instinct, the instinct of a nurse who has spent a lifetime running towards trouble, not away from it, took over. I would not, leave this woman stranded and alone on the side of a deserted road in the middle of a storm. I told the bus driver to let me off at the next stop, and then I turned and began to walk back. The cold, sleeting rain now a full-blown assault. As I approached the car, the woman looked up, her face a mixture of surprise and a new, wary hope. She was in her 70s, I guessed, a woman of immense and quiet dignity. Her face was etched with the fine, elegant lines of a life well lived, and her eyes, though filled with a momentary anxiety, were sharp, intelligent, and kind. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I asked, my voice a little breathless from the walk. She gave me a small, grateful smile. "Oh, thank you for stopping, dear," she said, her voice a low, cultured, and deeply calming sound. I seem to have found myself in a bit of a pickle. A flat tire, and of course my mobile phone is dead. I'm afraid I'm not quite sure what to do. I looked at the flat tire. I had spent 40 years married to a man who could fix anything, and I had paid attention. I knew my way around a car. "Well," I said, my voice full of a practical confidence that seemed to surprise her, "let's see what we've got in the trunk." I was not just a humble retiree. I was a woman of profound and often surprising competence. The woman, whose name I would learn much, much later, was Isabella Devero, watched with a look of growing and deeply respectful astonishment as I, a woman of her own generation, took charge. I found the spare tire, the jack, the lug wrench, and there on the side of a deserted, rain-swept road, in my Sunday best, I began the grimy, difficult, and deeply satisfying work of changing a tire. The work was hard, and it was messy. The lug nuts were on tight, and it took all of my strength to break them loose. The new tire was heavy and awkward, and by the time I had it in place, My hands were covered in a thick black layer of grease and mud, and my simple dark blue dress was splattered with the dirty, oily water from the road. The woman Isabella stood by holding the umbrella over my head, her initial distress having been replaced by a look of quiet, profound, and deeply impressed awe. She did not offer empty, unhelpful advice. She simply watched, a silent, respectful witness to my quiet, determined competence. As we worked, we talked. It was a simple, easy conversation, the kind that can only happen between two strangers who have been thrown together by a small shared crisis. She asked me where I was going, and I told her, with a small, weary sigh, that I was on my way to my son's mother-in-law's Christmas party. I did not tell her of the family drama, of my own deep reluctance to attend. I simply said that family obligations must be honored. She nodded, a look of deep and compassionate understanding in her eyes. It was the look of a woman who was herself no stranger to the complex and often difficult demands of family. She in turn told me that she had been on her way to a dinner party herself, but had taken a wrong turn, a detour to avoid a traffic jam on the main highway. "It seems the universe had other plans for me this evening," she said, her voice a low, musical, and slightly mysterious sound. By the time I had tightened the final lug nut, we were no longer strangers. We were two women of a certain age, two women of quiet strength and deep, unspoken experience, who had found a moment of unexpected and genuine human connection on the side of a lonely, rain-swept road. As I was closing the trunk, a wave of cold, shivering reality washed over me. The rain had soaked through my coat, and the biting wintry wind was cutting through me like a knife. Isabella, seeing me shiver, did not hesitate. "Oh, my dear, you are freezing," she said, her voice full of a sudden, urgent concern. "You must take my coat." I, of course, refused, but she was a woman who was clearly not used to having her offers refused. Then, my eyes landed on the simple, elegant gift box that I had been clutching under my arm the entire time. The box was a little damp, but the contents I knew were safe, and in that moment, I made a decision. "No," I said, "but you must take this." I handed her the box. "It's a prayer shawl," I explained. "I knitted it myself. It's very warm, please." "I insist." She looked at the box and then at me, her eyes wide with a look of stunned and deeply touched surprise. She opened it, and her breath caught in her throat as she saw the soft sapphire blue wool, the intricate lace-like pattern. She lifted it from the box with a reverence that was a gift in itself. It's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she whispered, her voice thick with a genuine and profound emotion. She wrapped it around her own elegant shoulders, and a look of pure, unadulterated comfort and gratitude washed over her face. In that moment, the gift had found its true home. It had been intended for a woman who would not appreciate its value, and it had, by a strange and wonderful twist of fate, found its way to a woman who did. After a few false starts, the engine of the luxury sedan finally turned over, its quiet, powerful hum a welcome sound in the gloomy, rain-swept twilight. Isabella, now warm and comfortable in her new, hand-knitted shawl, looked at me with a gratitude that was so deep and so genuine it was almost overwhelming. "I don't know how to thank you, my dear," she said, her voice full of a sincere and profound emotion. "You have been a true angel of mercy this evening." She offered to drive me the rest of the way to the party, an offer I politely but firmly refused. I did not want to arrive at the Harrington mansion in a car that was even more luxurious than their own. It would only add another layer of complication to an already impossibly difficult evening. So I simply gave her the directions to get back to the main highway, and I wished her a safe journey. As her car pulled away, its red tail lights disappearing into the rain and the darkness, I was left once again alone, but I was not the same woman I had been an hour before. I was colder, I was wetter, I was dirty, but my heart was for the first time in a very long time strangely and unaccountably warm. I finally arrived at the Harringtons' mansion over an hour late. The party was in full swing, the sound of loud music and even louder laughter spilling out into the cold, wet night. I walked up the grand, sweeping driveway, my simple stained dress and my wind-blown, rain-dampened hair a stark and pitiful contrast to the glittering, perfect world that lay just beyond the front door. I felt a new wave of dread wash over me. I was not just a humble working-class mother-in-law anymore. I was a mess, a dirty, disheveled, and deeply embarrassing mess. I almost turned and walked away, but my sense of duty, my deep and perhaps foolish desire to see my son propelled me forward. I took a deep breath and I pushed open the grand, oversized front door. I stepped into the foyer, and the immediate and profound silence that fell over the nearest group of guests was a testament to the sheer, shocking spectacle of my own appearance. The music was still playing, the laughter was still echoing from the deeper recesses of the house. But in my immediate vicinity, a small perfect circle of stunned, horrified silence had formed. The guests stared at me, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and open, undisguised contempt. They saw a woman who had, in some unimaginable way, violated the most sacred rule of their world. The rule of perfect, effortless and impeccable appearances. The moment my daughter-in-law Brittany saw me, her face, which had been a mask of perfect hosty charm, contorted into a new ugly expression of pure unadulterated fury and disgust. She moved towards me with the speed and deadly grace of a predator, her emerald green dress a shimmering venomous blur. She intercepted me at the door. Before I could even take another step into the main room, her body a physical and deeply hostile barrier. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words, when they came, were a low, vicious hiss, a stream of poison delivered directly into my ear. "What do you think you are doing?" she spat, her voice a low, trembling whisper of pure rage. "Look at you. You are a disgrace. You are an embarrassment." The cruelty in Brittany's eyes was a cold, hard, and brilliant thing, like the light reflecting off a shard of broken glass. Her words were not just an expression of her own personal humiliation, they were a declaration of my absolute and unforgivable otherness. I was a piece of dirt that had been tracked into her pristine, white-carpeted world, and her only thought was to scrub me out as quickly and as ruthlessly as possible. Her parents, drawn by the sudden dramatic shift in the atmosphere, quickly appeared at her side, their faces a mirror of their daughter's own disgust. Her father, a man named Roger, who always looked at me as if I were a particularly unpleasant smell, looked me up and down, his lip curled in a sneer of open contempt. "Good Lord, Esther," he said, his voice a low booming rumble of disapproval. "What happened to you? Did you get lost in a ditch somewhere?" His wife Carol simply stared at me, her perfectly made-up face a mask of horrified disbelief. She looked as if I had just thrown up on her expensive shoes. My son Michael was the last to arrive. Drawn from the deeper recesses of the party by the sudden chilling silence that had fallen over the foyer, he saw me standing there, wet, dirty and surrounded by his new hostile family, and the look on his face was one of pure agonizing conflict. I saw a flicker of his old loving self, a wave of genuine concern for his mother. But it was immediately and completely extinguished by a much more powerful wave of shame, of embarrassment, of a desperate and pathetic fear of his wife's disapproval. He stood beside his wife, his posture a steady and silent, impotent misery. He would not look me in the eye. It was Brittany who delivered the final, executing blow. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was a clear, cold, and utterly merciless command, spoken with the quiet, unshakable authority of a queen banishing a peasant from her court. "We would prefer if you left," she said, her words as sharp and as clean as a guillotine's blade. "You are an embarrassment, and you are ruining the elegant atmosphere of our party." She did not just ask me to leave. She used the royal we, a pronoun that encompassed her, her parents and my own silent, complicit son. It was a formal and final act of excommunication. They physically blocked my path, a solid wall of wealth, of status, of a deep and abiding contempt for everything I was. They were not just asking me to leave their party, they were trying to erase my very existence. The humiliation was a profound and absolute thing. And in that moment, as I stood there, surrounded by the hostile, judging eyes of my son's new family, I felt a loneliness so deep, so complete, that it was almost a kind of peace. I had nothing left to lose. Just as I was about to turn and walk away, to retreat back into the cold, wet night that had become my only sanctuary, the grand, oversized front door of the mansion swung open again. The sound was a loud, dramatic interruption to the small, ugly drama that was unfolding in the foyer. The Harringtons' butler, a man with a perpetually pained expression, stood in the doorway, and his voice, when he spoke, was filled with a new and completely uncharacteristic tone of awe and reverence. He did not speak to the hosts. He spoke to the room, to the entire suddenly silent party. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing with a sense of historic importance, announcing the arrival of Mrs. Isabella Devereux. The effect of that name on the room was instantaneous and electric. A collective, audible gasp went through the crowd. The low, murmuring conversations of the party ceased completely, replaced by a new, excited and deeply reverent silence. The name Devereux was not just the name of a wealthy family. It was the name of a dynasty. The Devereux were true, old money, a family that had been at the pinnacle of the city's social and financial world for over a century. They were a family of such immense and quiet power that they made the Harringtons' flashy new money lifestyle look like a cheap, pathetic imitation. Isabella Devereux, the family's notoriously private and formidable matriarch, was a legend, a woman who rarely if ever attended social events of this kind. Her presence at the Harringtons' party was not just an honor, it was a miracle, a social coup of the highest possible order. The transformation of my sons in-laws was a sight to behold. The looks of disgust and contempt on their faces were instantly and comically replaced by expressions of fawning, sycophantic excitement. Their cruelty towards me was forgotten in an instant, their minds now completely consumed by the sudden, unbelievable opportunity to ingratiate themselves with the one person in the city who truly mattered. Brittany, her face now a mask of desperate charm, rushed forward, her hands outstretched, ready to greet the great lady. Her parents were right behind her, their smiles so wide they looked like painful, grotesque caricatures. They moved as one, a united front of shameless, ambitious social climbers, their own petty drama with me completely and utterly forgotten. And my son Michael trailed in their wake, a silent, forgotten afterthought, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. Isabella Devereux swept into the foyer like a queen entering her own court. She was a woman of immense and quiet power, her simple, elegant black dress and single string of pearls a testament to a wealth so vast it had no need to shout. She radiated an aura of unshakable and slightly intimidating authority. She completely and utterly ignored the fawning, outstretched hands of Brittany and her parents. Her eyes, the same sharp, intelligent eyes I had looked into on the side of a dark, deserted road, did a slow, sweeping survey of the room. She was not looking at the hosts. She was looking for someone. Her gaze swept past the glittering, important guests, past the towering, ridiculous ice sculpture of a swan, and then it landed on me. I was still standing in the corner, a wet, dirty, and forgotten ghost at the edge of the celebration. And the most remarkable thing happened. A brilliant, warm, and utterly genuine smile illuminated her regal face. She walked directly past a stunned and now deeply confused Brittany. She walked past Roger and Carol Harrington, who were left standing with their hands outstretched and their foolish, fawning smiles frozen on their faces. She walked directly to me, and in front of the entire silent and now completely captivated party she did something that was in the context of their world, an act of social revolution. She embraced me. She wrapped her arms around my damp, dirty shoulders and gave me a hug that was filled with a genuine and profound warmth and affection. "My dear," she said, her voice ringing with a clear and deeply grateful sincerity, "I am so glad I found you. I was so worried. I was hoping you would be here." I was for a moment too stunned to speak. The entire room was frozen, a tableau of stunned, disbelieving faces. The guests, the hosts, my son, they were all staring at us, their minds struggling to comprehend the impossible scene that was unfolding before them. The city's most powerful, most exclusive, and most reclusive matriarch was embracing the dirty, disheveled, and deeply embarrassing old woman they had all just moments before been so eager to cast out. Isabella pulled back, but she kept her hands on my shoulders, a clear and very public gesture of alliance and protection. She looked at me and then she turned to address the entire silent and now deeply fascinated room. In the profound and now deeply uncomfortable silence of the ballroom, Isabella Devereux's voice, a low, cultured, and utterly authoritative sound, rang out with a clarity that was almost startling. "I would not be here tonight," she announced, her gaze sweeping over the sea of stunned, upturned faces, "if it were not for this remarkable and incredibly kind woman." She turned her warm, brilliant smile on me, a smile of genuine and deeply felt gratitude. "I had a bit of car trouble on the way here this evening," she continued, her voice a masterpiece of understated, dramatic storytelling. "A flat tire on a dark, deserted road, in the middle of this dreadful storm. My phone was dead. I was stranded and I must admit, I was beginning to feel a bit desperate." The entire room was hanging on her every word. Brittany and her parents were staring at her, their faces a comical and increasingly horrified mask of dawning, catastrophic comprehension. And then, Isabella said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the entire room into the intimate circle of her story, "This angel of mercy appeared out of the rain. She not only stopped to help a complete stranger, but she, with her own two hands, changed my tire." A low, collective murmur of disbelief went through the crowd. The image of the elegant, powerful woman before them and the dirty, disheveled old woman beside her suddenly clicked into a new and unbelievable focus. Isabella was not finished. She gestured to the beautiful hand-knitted sapphire blue prayer shawl that was draped elegantly over her own shoulders. a shawl that I now realized was the only source of real, vibrant color in her entire understated ensemble. And as if that were not enough, she said, her voice now thick with a genuine and very public emotion, when she saw that I was cold and shivering, she gave me this magnificent gift, a shawl she had made with her own hands, a gift that was clearly intended for someone else. She is the living, breathing embodiment of the spirit of Christmas, a spirit of selfless and unconditional charity. The word charity, the very word that had been used as a weapon against me, the very concept that had been the source of all my humiliation, was now being used as a shield, as a sword, as a final and devastating judgment. The reversal of fortune was so swift, so complete, and so poetically just that it was almost dizzying. I stood there, in the center of the silent watching room, no longer a victim but the unlikely and unintentional architect of the most stunning social execution the city had ever seen. I looked at my son, Michael. He was staring at me, his face a pale ghostly white, his eyes wide with a look of dawning horrified and absolute understanding. He was finally for the first time seeing me, not through the distorted contemptuous lens of his wife's family but as I truly was. He was seeing the woman who had helped a stranger on the side of a road, the woman who had given away her only gift out of pure unadulterated kindness. He was seeing the mother he had, in his own weakness and his own shame, so casually and so cruelly betrayed. And in that moment, I saw the first flicker of the good, kind man I had raised, a man I had thought long since lost to the world. Isabella Devereaux, having delivered the first devastating blow, now turned her cold appraising and utterly merciless gaze on the hosts of the party. She looked at Brittany, at her mother, at her father, and the warm, grateful smile that had been on her face just moments before was gone, replaced by an expression of such profound and regal contempt that it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "I was told that this was a party that supported charity," she said, her voice now as cold and as sharp as a shard of ice. "I was told that the Harrington family were great philanthropists, pillars of the community." She paused, letting the weight of her words and their unspoken implication hang in the air. "But it seems," she continued, her voice a low, cutting and utterly damning indictment, "that the hosts of this party wouldn't recognize true charity, true kindness, true human decency, if it was standing right here in their own foyer, getting mud on their expensive carpets." The silence that followed was a profound and absolute thing. It was the silence of a public execution. The Harringtons stood there frozen, their faces a mask of pure unadulterated horror. They had been judged, and they had been condemned by the one person in the city whose judgment was absolute and unassailable. They had spent a lifetime clawing their way up the slippery pole of social acceptance, and in the space of a single terrible minute, they had been cast down, publicly and irrevocably, into the abyss. Isabella was not finished. She gave them one last withering look of disgust, a look that stripped them of all their pretensions, all their wealth, all their self-importance, and left them naked and pathetic and small. "I find," she said, her voice a quiet final dismissal, "that I have lost my appetite for this evening." And then, she did the most remarkable thing of all. She turned to me, and her face was once again warm, and kind, and full of a genuine and profound respect. She held out her hand. "Esther, my dear," she said, her voice now a warm personal invitation. "It seems I am in need of a new dinner companion this evening. Would you do me the honor of joining me?" I looked at her outstretched hand, and then I looked at the shattered, horrified faces of my son's family. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the warm, intoxicating and deeply satisfying sensation of my own, quiet and unassailable power. I took her hand. "I would be delighted, Isabella," I said, my own voice clear, and steady, and strong. And together the two of us, the city's most powerful matriarch and the humble, retired nurse, turned and walked out of that grand and suddenly very small room, leaving behind us a scene of utter and beautiful social devastation. The epilogue to this story is one of quiet and unexpected joy. The story of the Devereaux snub at the Harringtons' Christmas gala became the undisputed scandal of the season. It was whispered about at every dinner party, every country club, every charity luncheon for the next 6 months. The Harringtons, who had been so desperate for social acceptance, had achieved a new and far more potent kind of fame. They were a laughingstock, a cautionary tale, a living, breathing symbol of the ultimate social death. Their carefully constructed world of influence and importance crumbled overnight. The investors that Roger Harrington had been so desperate to impress wanted nothing to do with him. Their so-called friends, who had been so eager to bask in their reflected glory, now crossed the street to avoid them. They were social pariahs, and their fall from grace was as swift as it was absolute. My son's marriage, a union built on the flimsy foundation of social ambition, did not survive the blast. Michael, his eyes finally and painfully opened to the true, hollow nature of his wife and her family, left her. He did not do it with anger, but with a kind of quiet, profound sadness. He had been a fool, and he knew it, and the price of his foolishness had been the betrayal of his own mother. Our own relationship, which had been so fractured, so full of a painful, unspoken distance, began a slow and tentative process of healing. He came to me, not with excuses, but with a quiet and deeply felt apology, and I, in turn, offered him not a lecture but a cup of tea. It was a start. My own life, however, was transformed in ways I could never have imagined. My new friendship with Isabella Devereaux, a friendship forged in the rain and the mud on the side of a deserted road, blossomed into a deep and powerful alliance. She was a woman who, like me, understood the value of quiet strength, of authentic character, of a life lived with purpose. She saw in me not a charity case, but an equal, and she was determined to give my life's work the platform she felt it deserved. She made a massive and very public donation to my small, humble church charity, a donation so large it allowed us to expand our services, to open a new shelter to help hundreds of more people. And then she did something even more extraordinary. She appointed me to the board of the Devereaux Philanthropic Foundation, one of the most powerful and influential charitable organizations in the world. She gave me a voice. She gave me a platform. She gave me the resources to turn my lifelong passion for helping others into a force for real and lasting change, on a scale I had never in my wildest dreams imagined. My humble act of kindness, a simple instinctual gesture of compassion for a stranger, had in the end led to my ultimate and most profound empowerment. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.